Hello and welcome to Opticca University. In this video tutorial, we would be going through tips and tricks for performance tuning of a Software AG integration server flow service. For illustration, we would go through service get customer orders. When it comes to performance of a flow service, efficient pipeline management is the key to it. This requires us to drop unwanted variables on each step instead of waiting till the end of the service. In this service, variables customer ID and customer number are inputs to child service get customer order numbers, and as they are no longer required, they are being dropped in pipeline out. Now let's move on to loop steps. In loop steps, iteration specific variables must be dropped at the end of each iteration to get better performance and also avoid unexpected results in next iteration. In this particular map step, variables shipper codes and shipper details are iteration specific. Hence, they are being dropped at the end of each iteration. Apart from this, avoid using built-in service append to document list where possible, as append to document list degrades performance due to the way it works. In both loops on order numbers as well as shipper codes, you'll see here output arrays have been defined. Now let's move on to map steps. In map steps, if source and target documents have same structure and variables, then try to map at document level instead of variable level mapping. Copying by reference significantly reduces the memory and time required for executing a link at runtime. In this particular map step, mapping of document list shipper details to document list shipper details inside order details is at document level instead of mapping at variable level. Now let's move on to validations. If you set up validation via the properties for a transformer when it is already set up for validation via the service, input or output tab, integration server performs validation twice. This can slow down the execution of a transformer and ultimately the flow service. Validate cust number, which is being called as a transformer. If you see in the properties, validate input and validate output are set to true. And now if we go on to the service validate cust number, you will find here that both validate input and validate output are set as true. This will lead to validation being done twice, both at the service invocation level and also in the invoked service. Now let's move on to some service creation basics which need to be followed from performance standpoint. Try to keep services short and avoid trying to put all the logic in one single service and instead break them into separate logical service. As you can see here, child service get customer order numbers, get order details, get shipper details have been created to divide service logic into multiple blocks instead of cluttering service get customer orders. Apart from this, in all your top level service, try to have a finally block where you can drop all the unwanted variables either by the usage of clear pipeline or you can drop them manually. Services like save pipeline to file and restore pipeline from file should not be present in your services in production environment as they would lead to unnecessary usage of disk space as well as server resources to save the data onto disk and then retrieve the data back from the disk. Similarly, services which retrieve static data from configuration files or property files must be cached to improve performance. Like it can be seen here, we have set cache results as true and then cache expire as 1440, which is the number of minutes for which we want the pipeline contents to remain in memory. Now let's move on to logged fields. Avoid setting all input parameters or output parameters as logged fields and instead use only limited parameters as logged fields which you need to search stored service data. As you can see here, this approach of selecting all input parameters and all output parameters is completely incorrect approach, and wise approach would be to select very limited parameters which are required to search service data. Now let's move on to service level properties, some of the runtime properties. As you can see here, stateless should be turned as true for top level services if there is no need to store state information. Otherwise, integration server will end up storing state information, which is of no use, leading to degraded performance. Now let's move on to some of the service audit properties. As you can see here, if you are not using service audit properties, enable auditing should be turned as never. Now, if you are using enable auditing, try to use it only in top level services. And in top level services, you need to set logon as error only, because if you'll try to set it as error, success, and start, integration server will end up logging it in all the three cases. Whether if it's an error, then also it will be logged. If it's a success, then also logging will happen. So in the end, there'll be a logging which will be always done twice, at the start of the service and at the end of the service, irrespective of it whether it is success or failure. Now the next one is include pipeline. Try to set this include pipeline as on errors only if it is required. Otherwise, you can also set it as never if you don't need the pipeline. Because if you set it as always, pipeline will always be logged twice. One at the start of the service and one at the end of the service, irrespective of the service being success or failure. Remember, integration server uses the network to send audit data to the service log and uses memory to actually save the data in the service log. If a large amount of data is saved, performance will be impacted. Thank you for your time to view this video tutorial. For more information, visit www.opticca.com.